Bullies torment the silent new kid, then discover he's an MMA champion. Charles Scott slouched in the hard plastic chair outside the principal's office of Westlake High School, trying to make himself as small as possible. At 15, he was already used to being the new kid. His father's job had moved them 4 times in the last 3 years, but that didn't make it any easier, especially not when he was decidedly average height, with a softness around his middle that seemed to scream target to the predators that roamed every high school's hallways. Principal Donovan emerged from her office with a polite smile. "Charles, welcome to Westlake. Your transcripts show you're an excellent student. I'm sure you'll fit right in here." Charles nodded, not bothering to tell her that fitting in had never been his strong suit. He tugged at the sleeves of his oversized hoodie and followed the student guide she'd assigned him, a cheerful girl named Mia who talked non-stop as she showed him around the sprawling campus. "The cafeteria's through there, library's on the 2nd floor, and watch out for the boys' locker room near the gym. It always smells like someone died in there," Mia said with a laugh. "What's your first class?" "Physics with Mr. Kramer," Charles mumbled, glancing at his schedule. "Oh cool, that's in the science wing, I'll show you." Mia led him down a crowded hallway where students parted around them like water around a rock, except for 3 boys who didn't move at all. Charles saw them before Mia did. The tallest, one leaning against a locker with casual arrogance, flanked by 2 others who mimicked his posture. The leader was classically handsome in a generic way, square jaw, athletic build, expensive clothes. He nudged his friends as Charles and Mia approached. "Hey Mia," the tall one called out. "Who's your new friend?" Mia's cheerful demeanor dimmed slightly. "Jackson, this is Charles, he just moved here. Charles, this is Jackson Miller." Jackson looked Charles up and down with undisguised contempt, his gaze lingering on Charles's midsection. "Welcome to Westlake, Pudge. You might want to find the gym before the cafeteria." His friends, a muscular boy with a buzz cut and a lankier one with a permanent smirk, snickered on cue. Charles felt heat rise to his face but kept his eyes down. He'd learned long ago that engaging only made things worse. Besides, if his father found out he'd gotten into trouble on his first day at a new school. "Ignore them," Mia whispered as she hurried Charles past. "Jackson's dad owns half the town, so he thinks he owns the school." Charles just nodded, his face a careful mask of indifference. Let them think he was weak. Let them underestimate him. That's what everyone did. No one at Westlake knew about the trophies packed away in boxes at his new house. No one knew about the grueling training sessions or the junior championship titles. No one knew that beneath his baggy clothes, there wasn't just softness, but muscle built through years of discipline. No one knew that Charles Scott had been practicing mixed martial arts since he was 6 years old. His father, a strict businessman who demanded excellence, had insisted on it. The mind and body must both be strong, he'd always said. While other kids played video games, Charles trained. While they went to parties, he competed. His father accepted nothing less than total commitment. But at school, Charles kept that part of himself hidden. New town, new school, same strategy. Stay quiet, stay invisible, stay out of trouble. Fighting was for the ring, not the hallways. Mr. Kramer's physics class passed without incident. Though Charles felt Jackson's friends, he learned their names were Trent and Liam, watching him from the back row. When the bell rang, he gathered his books slowly, letting the room clear before he ventured into the hallway. It wasn't enough. Jackson was waiting outside, leaning against the wall with performative casualness. "So, where'd you move from, Pudge?" he asked, falling into step beside Charles. "San Diego," Charles mumbled, quickening his pace slightly. "Hear that, guys? We've got a California boy." Jackson exchanged amused looks with Trent and Liam, who had materialized on Charles's other side. "Shouldn't you be all tanned and fit? What happened?" Charles said nothing, his knuckles whitening around his books. "Just keep walking, don't engage, don't show anything." "I asked you a question, Pudge," Jackson said, his voice hardening as he stepped in front of Charles, blocking his path. Charles stopped, finally looking up to meet Jackson's gaze. For the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that made Jackson blink in surprise, before Charles lowered them again. "I need to get to my next class," Charles said quietly. "Yeah, well, I need you to answer when I talk to you," Jackson replied, nudging Charles's shoulder hard enough to make him stumble back a step. A small crowd had begun to gather. Charles recognized the expressions, the mix of excitement and discomfort that came from watching someone else's humiliation. "Walk away. Just walk away." His father's voice echoed in his head. "Control is everything, Charles, in the ring and in life. The moment you lose control, you've already lost." Charles sidestepped and tried to move past, but Trent stuck out his foot. It was such a classic, predictable move that under different circumstances Charles might have laughed. Instead, he pretended to trip, letting his books scatter across the floor as he caught himself with intentionally awkward movements. The gathered students laughed, and Jackson smirked down at him. "Careful there, Pudge. Those floors can be slippery." As Charles gathered his books, face burning with calculated embarrassment rather than genuine shame, he heard a girl's voice cut through the laughter. "Real mature, Jackson. Did Daddy not give you enough attention this morning?" Charles looked up to see a girl with short purple hair and combat boots standing with her arms crossed. She was small, but radiated a confidence that made her seem larger. Jackson's smirk faltered. "Mind your own business, Zoe." "Or what?" she challenged, helping Charles pick up his last book. "You'll tell your dad?" "Ooh, scary." Jackson's face darkened, but the warning bell rang, sending students scurrying to their classes. He pointed at Charles. "See you around, Pudge." As the crowd dispersed, the purple-haired girl handed Charles his physics textbook. "I'm Zoe. You're the new kid, right?" Charles nodded. "Charles, thanks for that." She shrugged. "Jackson's a tool. Been that way since kindergarten. Where's your next class?" "English, room 203. "Same, come on." As they walked, Zoe filled him in on Westlake's social hierarchy. Jackson Miller was indeed the son of a wealthy real estate developer who donated generously to the school. Trent was his right-hand man, a lacrosse player with anger issues. Liam was the smarter of the three, which wasn't saying much. "They pretty much run things around here," Zoe explained. "Teachers look the other way because Jackson's dad is on the school board." "What about you?" Charles asked. "Where do you fit in?" Zoe laughed. "I don't, and I like it that way." She studied him with curious eyes. "What about you? What's your story?" Charles hesitated. "No story, just the new kid." "Uh-huh," she said, clearly unconvinced. "Well, new kid, a word of advice. Jackson gets bored easily. If you don't react, he'll eventually move on." But Jackson didn't move on. Over the next 2 weeks, he seemed to make Charles his personal project. It started with comments about Charles's weight, then evolved to knocking books from his hands, accidentally spilling food on him in the cafeteria, and shoving him into lockers when teachers weren't looking. Charles endured it all with quiet stoicism, never fighting back, never showing the anger that sometimes burned so hot he had to clench his fists in his pockets to contain it. Every day after school, he went home and channeled that anger into his training, hitting the punching bag in his garage until his knuckles were raw and his t-shirt was soaked with sweat. His father watched these sessions with growing concern. "Something is bothering you," he observed one evening. "It wasn't a question." "It's nothing," Charles grunted, landing a particularly vicious kick that made the heavy bag swing wildly. "Your technique is sloppy when you're emotional," his father said. "Remember what I taught you. Control." "I am controlling." Hurt, Charles snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. "Sorry, Dad, it's just the usual stuff at a new school." His father studied him with sharp eyes. "Are you being bullied?" Charles hesitated, then nodded once. "And you haven't fought back?" Again, not a question. "You always said fighting is for the ring, not for school, that I should only use what I know for competition or self-defense." His father was silent for a long moment. "There are many forms of self-defense, Charles. Sometimes the greatest victory is showing restraint. To other times," he trailed off, then straightened. "You must decide when enough is enough, but remember this, there is a difference between standing up for yourself and seeking revenge." Charles pondered those words later that night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. How much more was enough? He'd already endured more than most would, but each time he walked away, each time he swallowed his pride, Jackson's behavior worsened. The next day brought a new escalation. Charles was changing after gym class, trying to be quick and invisible as always, when he heard familiar voices approaching the locker room. "Look at Pudge trying to hide," Jackson called out, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. "What's the matter? Embarrassed?" Charles had his shirt halfway on when Jackson yanked it out of his hands. The other boys in the locker room fell silent, some looking uncomfortable, others eagerly anticipating the entertainment. "Give it back," Charles said quietly, fighting to keep his voice level. Jackson dangled the shirt overhead. "Jump for it, Pudge." But as Charles stood there shirtless, something unexpected happened. Jackson's mocking smile faltered. Trent and Liam exchanged confused glances, because what they saw wasn't what they expected. Yes, Charles carried some extra weight around his middle, but beneath that was an unmistakable layer of muscle. His shoulders and arms were defined in a way that spoke of years of training, not just casual exercise. "What the hell?" Jackson muttered, his composure slipping. Charles took advantage of the moment to snatch his shirt back, quickly pulling it on. As he did, he caught a glimpse of Zoe watching from the doorway of the locker room, her eyes wide. The shift was subtle but immediate. As Charles walked to his next class, he noticed people looking at him differently. Whispers followed him down the hall. By lunchtime, rumors were circulating. "I heard he's actually ripped under those hoodies. Someone said they saw scars on his back, like from fighting. Maybe he's in witness protection or something." Zoe slid onto the bench across from him in the cafeteria. "So, were you ever going to mention that you're secretly jacked?" Charles picked at his food. "It's not a secret. It just never came up." "Right. Because, hi, I'm Charles and I have abs is such a weird introduction." Zoe rolled her eyes. "Seriously, what's your deal? You let Jackson push you around when you clearly don't have to." Before he could answer, a shadow fell across their table. Jackson stood there, flanked as always by Trent and Liam, but something had changed in his demeanor. There was uncertainty now, mixed with the usual arrogance. "Heard some interesting things about you, Pudge," Jackson said, his voice just a little too loud, drawing attention from nearby tables. "Someone said you're hiding some muscle under all that, Pudge." He laughed at his own joke, but it sounded forced. Charles said nothing, continuing to eat his lunch methodically. "I'm talking to you," Jackson snapped, slapping Charles's tray and sending it flying off the table. Food splattered across the floor and the cafeteria fell silent. Slowly, deliberately, Charles stood up. For the first time, he allowed his posture to straighten completely, squaring his shoulders and lifting his chin. The transformation was remarkable. Even though he wasn't as tall as Jackson, something in his stance made him suddenly seem more substantial, more present. "I need to clean this up," Charles said, his voice quiet but firm. "Excuse me." Jackson, clearly thrown by this subtle change, stepped into Charles's path. "What's wrong? Finally found some backbone, Pudge?" Charles met his gaze steadily. "Move, please." "Make me," Jackson challenged, giving Charles a hard shove that sent him back a step. The cafeteria was completely silent now, every eye fixed on the confrontation. A teacher at the far end of the room had noticed the commotion and was making her way over, but she was still too far away to intervene. Charles took a deep breath. "Last chance. Step aside." Jackson laughed and shoved him again. "Harder this time." "Or what? What are you going to—" What happened next was so fast that many students later gave conflicting accounts. All anyone knew for certain was that one moment Jackson was standing there sneering confidently, and the next he was flat on his back on the cafeteria floor, staring up at the ceiling with a stunned expression. Charles hadn't even appeared to move aggressively. There was just a blur of precise movement, a shift of weight, a carefully placed hand, and suddenly Jackson was airborne, then prone. The silence in the cafeteria deepened to something like awe. Trent recovered first, lunging at Charles with a wild swing. Charles sidestepped with fluid grace, using Trent's momentum to guide him straight into a table. Liam, seeing both his friends taken down in seconds, backed away with his hands raised. "What is going on here?" The teacher had finally arrived, looking from Jackson on the floor to Trent, sprawled across a lunch table to Charles, standing calmly in the center of it all. "He attacked us," Jackson said, scrambling to his feet with as much dignity as he could muster. "Out of nowhere, we were just talking and he went crazy." Dozens of voices rose at once to contradict him. Jackson started it. He knocked Charles's food over. Charles was just defending himself. The teacher raised her hands for silence. "Charles Jackson, principal's office. Now, the rest of you, lunch is over." As they were escorted out of the cafeteria, Jackson hissed at Charles, "You're dead, you know that? When my father hears about this—" "Your father," Charles interrupted quietly, "should teach you better manners." In the principal's office, Jackson's version of events fell apart quickly as student after student was called in to give their account. Even students who normally allied with Jackson couldn't deny what they'd seen. When it was Charles's turn to speak with Principal Donovan, he was prepared for detention at minimum, possibly suspension. "Charles," she said, studying him over her glasses, "I've heard many versions of what happened today, but one thing is consistent. You showed remarkable restraint. You defended yourself without causing injury. That said, we have a zero-tolerance policy for physical altercations." Charles nodded, accepting whatever punishment was coming. "However," she continued, "given the circumstances and the fact that multiple witnesses confirm you were provoked, after weeks of harassment, I'm going to let you off with a warning. Jackson, on the other hand, will be serving detention for the next month." "You can't do that," Jackson protested. "My father will be very interested to hear about your behavior," Principal Donovan finished for him. "In fact, I've already called him. He's on his way." As Charles left the office, Zoe was waiting for him in the hallway. "Holy shit," she said without preamble. "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. Where did you learn to do that?" Charles shrugged uncomfortably. "I've been training in MMA since I was 6. My dad's kind of intense about it." "Kind of intense?" "Charles, you took down Jackson Miller like he was a toddler. Do you know how many kids have dreamed of doing that?" "I didn't want to," Charles admitted. "I've never used it outside of competition before." He started walking toward his locker, Zoe keeping pace beside him. "So why now? Why today?" Charles considered the question. "My dad told me I had to decide when enough was enough. I guess today it was enough." Word spread through Westlake High like wildfire. By the end of the day, Charles's takedown of Jackson was the stuff of legend, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Some versions had Charles defeating all 3 boys with a series of spinning kicks. Others claimed he'd revealed himself to be a secret martial arts master who had competed internationally. The reality was less dramatic, but more impactful. When Charles entered the hallway the next morning, the sea of students parted for him, not out of fear, but respect. People who had never spoken to him before nodded in greeting. A few even stopped to introduce themselves. Jackson, Trent, and Liam were noticeably subdued. Jackson's father had apparently been less than supportive of his son's bullying, and rumors circulated that he'd been grounded for a month, his car privileges revoked. At lunch, Charles's usual solitary table was suddenly sought after real estate. Zoe claimed her spot across from him, glaring away some hopeful freshman, then rolled her eyes at the spectacle. "Enjoy your 15 minutes, she said, stealing one of his fries. "High school fame is fickle." "I don't want fame," Charles said. "I just want to get through the year." "Too late for that. Hey, is it true you have a black belt in like 5 different martial arts?" Charles laughed, despite himself. "No. Just years of training in mixed martial arts. My dad was a competitive fighter in his youth. He wanted me to learn discipline." "Well, mission accomplished," Zoe said. "You showed more discipline not fighting back all those weeks than you did taking Jackson down yesterday." Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Jackson stood at the edge of their table, alone for once, looking uncomfortable. "Can I sit?" he asked stiffly. Charles and Zoe exchanged surprised glances. Then Charles nodded cautiously. Jackson sat down, staring at the table for a long moment before speaking. "My dad made me come apologize, but also I wanted to. What I did it wasn't cool." "No," Charles agreed. "It wasn't. Jackson struggled visibly. "I've always been the top dog here, you know. And then you showed up, and there was something about you that bugged me. Like you thought you were better than us or something." "I never thought that," Charles said. "I just wanted to be left alone." Jackson nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that now. Anyway, I'm sorry for all of it." He hesitated, then added, "And I was wondering, could you maybe show me how you did that move, the one where you flipped me?" Charles blinked in surprise. "You want me to teach you? If that's not weird." Jackson shrugged, a hint of his old confidence returning. "I mean, I'm still planning to be top dog around here, just maybe without being such a jerk about..." "Cassius," Zoe snorted. "Wow, character development in real time." But Charles was thoughtful. "It's not just about learning moves. It's about discipline and respect. My dad could probably explain it better than me." "Your dad," Jackson repeated. "Is he like a sensei or something?" Charles smiled slightly. "Something like that. He runs a business now, but he still trains. He's opening a small dojo here in town, actually. That's why we moved here." "Seriously? That's actually pretty cool." Jackson looked genuinely interested. "When does it open?" "Next month. You could come check it out if you want." As they continued talking, the cafeteria buzzed with whispers. The sight of Charles and Jackson sitting together, having a civil conversation, was almost as shocking as the fight had been. Over the following weeks, a tentative friendship formed, not just between Charles and Jackson, but with others as well. Charles slowly allowed his real self to emerge. Still quiet, still thoughtful, but no longer hiding. He started wearing more fitted clothes that didn't disguise his athletic build. When his father's dojo opened, several Westlake students, including Jackson and Trent, signed up for classes. On the first day of training, Charles's father addressed the new students with the same intensity he'd always shown his son. "You are not here to learn how to fight," he told them sternly. "You are here to learn when not to fight. Control begins with respect, for yourself and for others. Without that, nothing I teach you has any value." As the students lined up to begin their first lesson, Charles caught his father's eye and received a rare nod of approval. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, he felt like he belonged, not because he'd fought back, but because he'd finally stopped hiding who he was. Zoe, watching from the sidelines, gave him a thumbs up. "Not bad, Scott," she called out. "Not bad at all." And it wasn't perfect, high school never is, but it was a beginning. By standing up for himself, Charles had changed not just how others saw him, but how he saw himself. The lesson wasn't that violence solved problems, but that authenticity did. Being true to yourself, even when it was easier to hide. As Charles demonstrated a basic stance to a group of attentive students, including some who had once laughed at his humiliation, he reflected on how quickly things had changed. The bullies, who had tormented him, now looked to him for guidance. The school that had once felt like a battlefield now felt like a community. All because he'd finally decided that enough was enough. Well, now I want to know, what's your opinion about this story? Leave a comment, we'd love to hear from you. And tell us which city you watched this video from. And it's not over yet. There's another powerful story playing on your screen right now. Click on it. I'm waiting for you.